Hi, my name is Dale Olds. I work for VMware on their identity services. When I was first asked to give this presentation and said it was in the authentication track, I thought, well, I actually have more expertise in directory services and federated identity, not much authentication, even though I've presented on authentication at CIS last year. And I said, no, this is about postmodern authentication. And the phrase that immediately came to mind was the wasteland of authentication disillusionment. I've been doing this a long time. Somebody asked me how long have I been working in the identity space, and the first phrase that came to mind was X588. I started implementing what became Novell's directory service in about 1990. I now have people working for me that weren't even born when X588 came out. So it is a vast wasteland of authentication disillusionment. For all those years, we thought directory services were going to take off, and we were going to have single sign-on, and then we're going to have federation. And I still have more passwords now than I ever had. So it's a vast wasteland of disillusionment, but there is some hope. I really appreciated a comment Andre made in his keynote yesterday where he said that our strong authentication is only as good as our enrollment. I think that was a very insightful statement. And also, Alex Simons said a number of things in both his keynote and the presentation about sharing intelligence. So there has been a lot of work done in this area that I think will help in the context of accounts and how accounts are managed and preventing fraud, which will help in authentication. So I think this track is quite appropriate, even though there is a lot of disillusionment. So what are we going to talk about? Yeah, actually, David, what would have made sense is there's some way I could see it here and there, but it's okay. I always just read the slides anyway, so okay. We'll work with it. We're going to start with a story to hopefully make this a little bit more interesting. It's a story that I would expect most of the people in this audience are well aware of from a couple years ago from Wired Magazine, the Matt Honan story. We're going to talk about what happened there and use that as an introduction to shared signals and what the benefit would be of a shared signals ecosystem. We're going to talk about what's been done so far in various standards organizations, governments, and white papers. And then we're going to go through a very specific practical example of how a shared signals system could work and what benefit it would provide for the users. All right, so this fascinating story. Matt Honan was a writer at Wired at the time. So I think this is 2012. As he says at the start there, within an hour his entire digital life was destroyed. What this doesn't say that I think is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this is he had all of his work on a Mac with a solid-state drive, and the hackers, after they broke into his account, they wiped his Mac and his phone, and it had all of the pictures that he had of the first year of life of his daughter were on the Mac, and he eventually had a lot of contact with his hackers and found out exactly why they did it, found out exactly how they did it, and he asked why did they do this to him, and all they wanted to do was get to his Twitter account so that they could say homophobic and racist comments. They didn't really care about that stuff at all. It was just for fun. They wiped out the pictures of his daughter on his Mac. It's just a heartbreaking story. Of course, as you can read in the press, you find out later that a hard drive reconstruction company did get his pictures back. But it's a fascinating story. What I think is interesting to us here is what did the press report about it? The Mashable article says the highest priority things is he should have had a backup, and then he should have used two-factor authentication. The Huffington Post article said, well, two-factor authentication, he should create separate Apple IDs. That's kind of interesting when you understand the hack. I'm not sure how that would have helped. The Slate guy actually had I thought by far the best analysis, but it was his fourth point when he said password recovery is a menace, make sure your accounts aren't daisy-chained. The first ones he said is use two-factor authentication and do backup. So all the press picked up on this horrific story of what he should have done. What did he think was the primary issue? All his accounts were daisy-chained together. That was what led to this cascading effect of hackers getting from one account to the next and wiping out his digital life. But that's not what, the press saw it as all these other things. And by the way, all those other things are good. Keep backups and do two-factor authentication. But the primary issue was that this is an ecosystem of accounts. So let's talk about what actually happened in the attack real quick, so we can see how shared signals would help this in the future. It's pretty simple. He had a domain name that was registered, so the hackers looked up the domain name and got his postal address. Then they called up Amazon and said, I'm Matt Honan, here's my postal address. I have a credit card right here that I'd like to add to my account. So they added their credit card to his account, hung up, called back Amazon and say, I've lost access to my Amazon account. Here's my postal address and the last 4 digits of a valid credit card number. And the Amazon guy said, okay, you have access to the account. Now they have access to the account. He says, the hackers look in the account and they say, oh, here's the last 4 digits of Matt's credit card that's valid. I bet that's what he uses with Apple. So now they call up Apple and say, here's my billing address, here's the last 4 digits of a valid credit card number, and they get into the Apple account. Then they go to the Google account and say, do a password reset, which goes to the Apple account, which they now control. And then they issue the wipe on his phones and his laptop, and they have access to the Google account. They do a password reset on the Twitter account, which goes to the Google account that they now control. They get the password, they delete the Google account, and now they have access to Twitter and they start tweeting horrible things. And that was all they wanted. I mean, they could have had access to his bank information, they could have ordered stuff from Amazon. They did all this just to get to his Twitter account and start tweeting things. But it's pretty simple how this all worked and didn't take a lot of hacking skills. He had a lot of theories when it first happened to him about, did he have a bad password? Was it a weak password? They never guessed any of his passwords. They never even tried. They didn't need to. So in his conclusion, he said, I'm upset because the ecosystem that I have put so much trust in let me down so thoroughly. And I think that's kind of a key aspect here. We're not identity providers in isolation anymore. So what is being done by this ecosystem? And I need to look at the time occasionally. What if Amazon, Apple, Google, and Twitter had a way to share signals? If they would have had some way to indicate to each other something bad is happening to this account, you may want to keep track of this linked account with an extra level of security. So the first thing that I'm aware of that was published on this was in 2013, a white paper from the Open Identity Exchange called the Shared Signals Model, written by Andrew Nash, that described a system for preventing fraud from online accounts. Describes a signal manager perspective where an account manager can issue an event, and there's a signal manager that can route signals to recipients, and we'll go into specific examples of what that means later. Then Adam Dawes, who is here, Andrew is here as well. Adam is, I know, is at least at the conference. Gave a presentation at the Internet Identity Workshop in 2013, and as we'll see in a few minutes, there's also a new working group on this that Adam also leads. So there's some work from Google happening on this as well. There was a subsequent discovery project from the UK Cabinet Office, IDAP, the Identity Assurance Program, that tried to do a study to show how effective this would be. And the conclusions of the discovery project were the shared signals model would have had will have a significant positive impact on the identity ecosystem as a whole. So looking promising. Then just last year, the U.S. government, as part of the NSTIC program, gave Confirm a grant to demonstrate how shared signals model can mitigate the impact of account takeovers. So there's two governments, the UK and the US government, both sponsoring efforts in this area to help reduce online fraud. And then just recently, the Open Identity Foundation started the RISC working group that I think they had to have worked really hard to figure out an acronym that would say RISC. Because it's the Risk and Incident Sharing and Coordination Working Group. Okay, I think they started with the acronym and then came up with it. Anyway, the goal of the group is share information about important security events in order to thwart hackers from using compromised accounts that are daisy-chained, basically, and to start with email accounts. So you can see that this kind of system would be exactly the thing that would have helped in the Matt Honan case. So let's talk about how this could actually work. What kinds of systems would, because there's a number of models, and I think when I first started thinking about this, I started with this model because which I do, work for a large company that has an identity services system. I tend to know a lot of the people that work in the identity systems in these other vendors. They tend to know each other. They tend to come to CIS and talk to each other. So I would think what would be cool is if we could just get together and produce a spec that would show how shared signals could work, and then we could all implement it. Problem is that's a huge amount of work, and it's not viable from a business. Even if you can get the spec done, like I said, it's a vast wasteland. I've been doing this for a long time. The more I work in this area, the more I think we need to have technology that incents the business models to work in the right way. And one of the concerns I would have about this model is each participant must maintain business agreements with other participants. Everybody has to implement their own security implementation and get it right. Privacy constraints and controls may vary. Each participant must handle API. And I think the most important one is the fifth bullet there. Each participant is incented to provide competitive differentiators. Everybody's going to want to provide a little something special because that's what their incentive is as individual vendors. And that is not what we want for this system. We want a minimal, consistent, privacy-enhancing system to shared signals and prevent fraud and nothing else. So basically, this doesn't scale, and the operational overhead would slow or halt adoption. Ultimately, I think this is, more the way to go, is what's called the clearinghouse model. Each participant has only one business agreement, only one API. And I think most importantly, the signal manager is incented to enforce privacy and security. That's their business. That's their model. They are not in the business of providing little differentiators with their peers. And it's a low barrier of entry for participants. They don't have to implement the crypto. They don't have to implement APIs. They have to call APIs. The cons are, wow, that thing in the middle. We better protect that thing. What kind of security constraints are in there? How much information does that thing have? We certainly don't want to aggregate the potential security damage that could be done from each of the participants into one central place. That would make this worse. So the con is, how can you design a signal manager so that it doesn't become a honeypot? There's a bunch of other variations on these two models. I'm only going to talk about these two right now. But the variations have to do with distributing the cryptography to try to reduce the amount of information that is held in the signal manager. Everything, at least that I'm aware of so far in these designs, I thought that wasn't worth it. It made it so much more difficult for each participant, business-wise and implementation-wise, and did not significantly increase the security of the signal manager. So what are some of the design principles that we need to keep in mind if we're going to have a signal manager system or signal manager component, if we want to follow that clearinghouse model? First of all, it needs to get minimal information. In the A lot of times when I hear people describe the shared signal system, they give analogies like, oh yeah, this is like law enforcement agencies where they share information or share intelligence. Or this is like credit bureaus where they share loan history with each other. And while that's an interesting way of thinking about it, it's really ultimately not helpful, because for a shared signal online system, we want to make sure that signal manager holds as little information as possible. It never gets general information about what a user is doing. It gets no transactional information. It's not in the flow. It doesn't know where a user is authenticated. It doesn't know where a user has gone. It doesn't know anything about what the user is doing. It only keeps track of how is this account. Has anything happened to this account recently that linked accounts may need to know about? But as far as the privacy goes, it has no information about what the user has, where they've gone or what they've done. Signals are indicative, not prescriptive. It is one indicator to be fed into the risk analysis engine of the recipient. So in our example before, if Google got a signal from Apple that said this account has had the password reset, it would add that piece of information into its risk analysis. It's not telling Google what to do about that. It's just one piece of information into their analysis. It doesn't store any identifiers. It doesn't store any email addresses. It doesn't store any personal identifiable information. And another important principle is that the signal manager never reveals any piece of information that it didn't receive from the signal recipient first. And I'll give an example of what that means. The only piece of information it reveals is the signal itself. There has been an account takeover on an account that you have told me you know about and are linked to. So what is the minimum information needed to report an event? We need to know who's publishing it, what the event type is, and what it's about. So an example would be if I'm publishing an event, I'm Acme, and I'm publishing an event that Joe at acme.com has had our systems believe this account has been taken over. So 2 pieces of information, that's it. Signal recipients, like I said, we don't want to reveal information that they haven't already told us about. So if I want to get a signal about an account at acme.com, I need to register with the signal manager and say, here's my recipient ID, I'm Globex. I want to be notified on any signal you get about Joey at yahoo.com. And when you notify me, here's a number I want you to give back to me so that I know which reference I told you about that you're giving me the signal on. So what's actually in a signal? Assuming that I've registered or subscribed for a particular signal on a particular subscription, and that publisher publishes an event that corresponds to that reference, I would get a signal that says, here's your subscription reference that you told me, and here's the event that just happened to it. Password reset happened on this subscription, or account takeover happened on this subscription. Another interface that would be really useful, similar to the signal one, is before I've actually registered, before I've actually subscribed, because I'm in the process of creating an account. I am at a service provider and I'm creating an account, and my user wants to link it to Joey at yahoo.com, but I haven't actually created the account yet. So it'd be nice if I could have an interface to the signal manager that said, I'm Globex, I'm about to create an account. He wants to link it to Joey at yahoo.com. Tell me if this account is less than an hour old, because that would change the risk profile on creating the account. So, and of course, since the signal manager never releases any information, it can only answer questions. It's an identity oracle, and that's a shout out to Bob Blakely in the back of the room. It's an identity oracle. It actually conceals information. So the requester has to provide how long am I interested in this account existing, and then it gets back a yes, no. Okay, so those are some specifics of what the signals and events would look like. And I go through that in that level of detail to illustrate how little information is actually transferred, how small amount of information, and how simple this system is to try to get to the point where it's not a honeypot, where we can have the benefits of fraud detection without the security risks of having a clearinghouse that has too much information. So all external references, as they pass through the signal manager, are converted to tokens. You can think of this as like a one-way hash. So whenever the signal manager gets a reference, like an email address, it immediately turns it into a big number that is not reversible to get back to the email address. It's not encryption. It's a one-way hash or other equivalent mechanism. And that's what the system operates on. Tokenization service is isolated from the rest of the system. Only tokens and subscription references are stored. And so this is how it would actually work. The event publisher gives two pieces of information. The signal manager immediately turns the reference into a token, which is what it uses to operate in its database. The signal recipients had to have previously registered, so they already have their subscription references there. It knows how to correspond the tokens to subscription references, and that it can therefore issue the signals. It can say there's account takeover of Joe at acme.com to the signal recipients. So how would this have helped Matt? Well, first of all, the Matt story is incredibly brief and small compared to the number of linked accounts that most of us have. But it was a good story to show, to illustrate, I think, how even very simple systems like this could help. In that case, there were a number of places where there would have been a password reset signal. If Apple had determined that it could have been an account takeover, there could have even been an account takeover signal sent from Apple to Google or from Google to Twitter. So there was a number of places where this would have helped. I think more importantly, having a system like this in place would change the ecosystem, would change the whole nature of how these attacks flow, and would have a lot better visibility across identity providers as they help these systems, that would change the nature of the attack. The attackers would find some other way. So resources, next step. Here's some links. The Signal Manager APIs and descriptions were courtesy of Confirm Inc., used by permission. I love saying that. Next steps, what I would hope most of the people at CIS would get out of this would be to look at the OpenID Foundation working group, the RISC working group, and get involved. I think this is going to be a very significant area going forward. The beginning of sharing intelligence across the identity ecosystem. And one last but very important point is tomorrow in the keynote, Google will be demonstrating a shared signal system with Confirm and showing some real code, real working systems on how this could fit together.
We have time for one question. Anybody have any questions? Rajiv?
I was at least hoping for some hecklers. Oh, there he is. Okay, good.
All right, so I'll bite.
Do you want to stand up? Or? No.
So on the premise that something like this would help, can you go and trace back through what each of the actors would have had to do in order to either slow the attack or to prevent the particular attack that you talked about? There are different signals associated with the Honan attack.
Right. So
password resets. You couldn't have prevented bits of information from leaking into the system. The last 4 digits of the credit card.
Yeah,
things that were used to start the cascade. So imagine that the cascade started, and then the shared signals process was in place. What would each of the players would have to do And what were the thresholds of time and information that they would have to respond to in order to say they've mitigated the attack?
So I think in the examples I gave on where this could have helped things, I didn't say between Amazon and Apple, because in the actual attack, there was no linkage there. That was, they just social engineered to get the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. So that wouldn't have helped in that case. I think if a system like this was commonly deployed, hopefully we could get Amazon to participate, and there could have been some benefit there. But in this particular case, there wasn't. The first place where I think there could have been direct benefit was between Apple and Google. Even if it was just a password reset, even if they just sent a password reset notice from Apple to Google, and Google could have taken that into their risk analysis, they may have increased the security on allowing a password reset to happen on that account. Right. And similarly from Google to Twitter.
Yeah, so that takes into account almost an instantaneous response from the RISC system to lock something down?
Yeah, so, excellent point. Another aspect of this is part of the shared signal system with the signal manager. These need to be real-time signals. Right? This is not something you batch up and do once a day. They need to be able to be multicast.
All right, that's great. I think we've got about 5